Good morning. I'm Dr. Wilmer Leon in for Roland Martin. Just ahead on News 1 Now. The Chicago police received new recommendations for reform from its appointed task force. We'll discuss. As former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders prepare to battle it out at tonight's debate in New York, the two are still trying to woo black voters by speaking at the National Ashken Network's conference. We'll have highlights from Secretary Clinton's speech. North Carolina's governor is hoping his executive order will ease the backlash to the state's bathroom bill. But is it enough to stop the protests and bring back business? Cedric the Entertainer shares personal stories behind bringing awareness to diabetic nerve pain. Roland discusses the political footprint and past of the Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas with actor Wendell Pierce in part 2 of their sit-down. And we have a recap, all the NBA action from last night. News 1 Now starts right now. The Chicago Police Accountability Task Force has released a scathing report on the Chicago Police Department. The report, entitled Recommendations for Reform, Restoring Trust Between the Chicago Police and the Communities They Serve, highlights the fact that the Chicago Police Department's own data gives validity to the belief that police have no regard for the sanctity of life when it comes to people of color. For example, from 2008 to 2015, though African Americans are only a third of the population in Chicago, 74% of the people killed or shot by officers were black. Meanwhile, only 14% of shooting victims were Hispanic and only 8% were white. During the same time frame, police in Chicago also disproportionately used tasers against African Americans as well. 76% were black, 13% were Hispanic, while only 8% were white. But the point of the report was to actually develop recommendations on how to improve the police department. With over 100 recommendations to improve the police department, here are a few. Create an inspector general for public safety. Expand the body cam pilot program. Establish a deputy chief of diversity and inclusion. Create a community safety oversight board. Evaluate and improve the training officers receive with respect to youth. Joining me on the panel today to discuss this are Ralph Chittams of the Republican Party, Michelle Bernard, political analyst and attorney with the Bernard Center for Women, Politics, and Public Policy, and David Swerdlick, assistant editor at the Washington Post. So, to you all, is this report, does it really cover and make the types of substantive recommendations that are going to be necessary to improve or increase the public's faith in their police department?
Well, the report is just a piece of paper. The question is anything actually going to be done subsequent to this report? You've had, the Foxes now policing the Foxes, writing a report about the Foxes, and Rahm Emanuel has appointed a fox to oversee the foxes that were terrorizing the chickens. So let's see what actually happens.
That was an incredible analogy. But I got you.
Right.
David, go ahead.
I see the analogy, right? You have the fox on the hen house or the wolf, wolf to catch a wolf or whatever, but it's not a laughing matter. But I do take Ralph's point, right? What happens next after the report, Wilmer? I think the recommendations are good. I think it's good that the report is out there and these issues are on the table. When you see a stat that people, I think, had a sense of this, but now you've got the numbers in front of you. In a city that's roughly a third African American, that roughly 3/4 of the police killings and police woundings or injurings of citizens are toward African American citizens. There's clearly an imbalance in policing, and clearly needs to be a redirect of the way police approach the African American community. My thing, as always, is going back to this idea of, look, at the core of this, to me, is not so much those specific bullet points as much as police have to understand. Police have a tough job. It always bears repeating. They have a dangerous job, and you have to have police. But we have to get back to this idea in our cities that police serve the public. The public is not there to conform to the police. The police are there as public servants who are paid by taxpayers, who do a difficult and dangerous job, but they work for we the people, not the other way around.
Look, I looked at the report, and I've looked at some of the articles that have been written about it, and my first reaction is, all you've done is confirm something that most of us already knew.
So the response is, duh.
Exactly. I mean, the report seems to me, I am glad that the report was done. I understand that police have a very difficult job. I am hoping that what will happen is that people who will say, typically, it's your fault. The statistics are this high because it's black on black crime, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm hoping those people will look at the report and begin to understand that there is a problem within the culture. Rahm Emanuel, I believe, was sort of quoted as saying, and I'm paraphrasing here, the report is a report, but we already know racism exists in the country, and the question is, how are we going to deal with it? So, from my perspective, it's another report. More recommendations. Is anything going to change? Hopefully, when you have an independent police review board that was criticized in here for basically getting complaints and doing absolutely nothing about it, how do you give the public any sense that the replacement, if it's a civilian review board, which I think is what is being recommended, is going to be any different?
Well, and there are a couple of things. I did not get through the entire report, but I did not see any mention of Home and Square, the black site in Chicago where police for years have been taking people off the books and torturing them. I saw nothing about that. No one has been fired as a result of this. Names weren't really mentioned, and because there are people in charge, and the people in charge have either been setting a tone or have been following a tone. And finally, Chicago doesn't exist in a vacuum. So New York and stop and frisk, for example, this is part of a national systemic problem that fixing Chicago, if in fact that could happen, is not going to fix the problem.
Yeah. I think that I believe that the hope is that the person that Rahm Emanuel has selected to become the new quote-unquote permanent police chief is a person who, at least from what I've read, is a person who grew up in public housing, and I'm assuming that the belief is that he will be more sensitive to the concerns of the African American community.
Does Rahm Emanuel need to go?
Go ahead,
That's
Ralph.
it. But also, Rahm Emanuel purposely buried the police report on the killing of that young man. The video simply so that he could get reelected.
Right.
And now he unilaterally selected the next chief of police. That chief of police is now beholden not to the citizens, not to the committee, not to the council, but to the mayor who gave him the job. So I have no confidence that anything's going to change.
David?
Well, there's potential for things to change, and if any, but I don't have a whole lot of confidence either. When you look, but here's something. When you look at the last election, the district attorney, Anita Alvarez, she was voted out, and one of the key issues where she lost the confidence of the public was this idea that in the Laquan McDonald case, in a video that law enforcement had for months and didn't release it, there was not this recognition in the part of leadership that they had to be forthcoming and transparent and accountable towards folks. Yeah.
Another story making headlines this morning is Senator Bernie Sanders scheduled to speak at the 25th Annual National Action Network Conference. Well, he is scheduled to speak at the 25th Annual National Action Network Conference in New York City. This comes just one day after former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton spoke at the conference. But before she got up to speak, Armstrong Williams, Dr. Ben Carson's business manager, warned the crowd about falling for fluff. Here's a recap of their comments from last night.
As I have said many times, white Americans need to do a much better job of listening when African Americans talk about the seen and unseen barriers you face every day. We need to recognize our privilege and practice humility, rather than assume our experiences are everyone else's experiences.
We sit here, you hear the race speeches because they feel that's what you want to hear today. Everything in America is not always about race.
We have to demonstrate a sustained commitment to building opportunity, creating prosperity, and righting wrongs, not just every 2 or 4 years, not just when the cameras are on and people are watching, but every single day. I have worked on these causes all my adult life. I'm going to keep going at it no matter what.
Make these people earn your vote. If it's Donald Trump, so be it. If it's Bernie Sanders, so be it. Do not allow the Clintons and the establishment to waltz in here and wave their hand and everything is okay. Let them earn your vote.
I'm going to do everything I can to take on the gun lobby and to try to save lives, the lives of the children of women like this and the sisters and the brothers and the daughters and the sons of so many others. And I will work as hard as I can as your president to keep faith with them for police reform and demanding a criminal justice system that actually delivers justice.
I don't mind the hisses, because you know the truth when you hear it. Make them earn your vote. If you talk about race, they play the race card too, as they did in South Carolina against Barack Obama. Don't get caught up in the short memory. This is a business. They'll say whatever they need to say and do whatever they need to do to get elected.
If we're going to ask African Americans to vote for us, we cannot take you or your vote for granted. We can't just show up at election time and say the right things and think that's enough. We can't start building relationships a few weeks before a vote.
So there are a few questions I'd like to discuss with the panel. First, do you think Secretary Clinton's message is all talk, or is she really here to assist African Americans? And also, do you think that Armstrong Williams made a valid point?
I have to tell you, I completely agree with everything Armstrong Williams said, at least in the clips that we saw. I didn't see the entire speech, so let me just say, in the clips that were just played, and increasingly you are seeing more and more African Americans come to the conclusion that Republicans and Democrats alike take the issues of the African American community and just sort of poo-poo them. They know, Democrats know that they need our vote, but they also know that many African Americans aren't going to vote anywhere else, so your vote can be taken for granted. A lot of Republicans will say, we can't get the black vote, so why even bother? Force people to give you a reason to vote for them. I think it's critical, and with the Clintons, I thought her speech was good. I believe the comments that she made. I am of the belief that it has been all talk from Democratic leaders for many years, and what we have seen is that the plight of the African American community has not changed.
David?
Yeah, so full disclosure first. I know Armstrong. I've been on Armstrong's show. I think we all know Armstrong.
Yes.
Look, he has a point. I agree with Michelle that at a minimum, all politicians in both parties should work hard for the African American vote, not take the African American vote for granted. That being said, I think he's arguing from a position of weakness because his critique is a critique of Democrats when Democrats are working, I would say, considerably harder for the African American vote right now than Republicans, and Armstrong is a Republican. It's fair to say, look, the Clintons in the past have been inconsistent on race issues. There's been a lot of controversy about the '94 crime bill. In 2008, there were allegations that they were playing the race card against President Obama, and I think in some cases they did. Whether it was, even if it was sort of subtle, they played the race card. But
and
right
continued
now,
to play it throughout his administration.
But right there, Secretary Clinton is giving a speech trying to earn the African American vote in front of an African American leadership group, and he's saying they have to win your vote, and she's sitting there trying to win the vote.
Well, and remember, in terms of his credibility, Ben Carson, I can't say, worked actively to get the African American vote. I mean, he came up with some
Ben
sort
Carson
of
worked
rap.
actively to not get the
In fact, here's the thing that has to be realized about Armstrong's point. I think Armstrong made the right point, but his math was bad. This is why you have to show your work when you do math exams, because his standard line is race has nothing to do with this. And here's some data on some relevant issues that are impacting the African American community. When we look at wealth accumulation, when we look at unemployment, when we look at education, when we look at health care, all of these things, when you look at, for example, the average amount of white wealth is about $134,000 in a family. It's about $7,500 in the African American family. Wait a minute. When you look at the those are the wealth accumulation numbers on the screen there. You can look at education attainment. And when you look at education attainment, just in terms of bachelor degree, the unemployment rate nationwide, 5% African Americans is stated at 9. We know it's higher than that. Bachelor's degrees, 72.9%. African Americans about 10.3%. All of these things are relevant political issues, and race, it's not an accident that we are disproportionately impacted by all of these issues. Armstrong, on that point, is dead wrong.
But Armstrong didn't say that race is never an issue. Armstrong said that race is not always the issue, and that's the important point, because
but
not
Armstrong
in every situation
never
race
wants
is
to
not
discuss
always
race
the
as
issue.
the factor in terms of the solution. That was Armstrong basically setting it up so you could make that statement.
Well, the statement I just made is factual.
No, but
race is not always the issue.
Education,
it is the issue
unemployment,
sometimes, but not always.
health care, wealth disparity. Look at what's happening in Chicago. Police shootings. We have to go way down the list before we get to a point to where we are not disproportionately impacted by these issues.
Real quick, Michelle. Yeah. Ralph, I agree. Race is not always the issue, but that was not what I took away from what Armstrong said right there. He said race is not the issue here, but then he went on to talk about race. Right. Yeah, sorry, Michelle.
But let's get back to
well, quickly, because we got
Secretary Clinton. You know, she shows up. She shows up at a black church. So all of a sudden, she adopts a black dialect. I don't feel no ways tired.
President Obama did the same thing.
Exactly, and that's complete pandering to the black community.
But you know what? The fault really, the fault,
they get the vote.
The fault for this, and we got to move on. The fault for this, to me, really comes down to the CBC and the fact, and the CBC PAC, and the fact that they have not forced Hillary Clinton to commit to any tangible, workable solutions or policies before they gave her the endorsement. There's still plenty of news, one now, coming up. North Carolina's bathroom bill is drawing backlash from all over the country. Will the governor's executive order stop the critics? We'll hear from the NAACP president of North Carolina next. Cedric the Entertainer talks about what he is doing to shed light on diabetic nerve pain. It's 17 past the hour. Stay with us. We'll be right back.